Welcome you all. Another important term, liquidity adjustment facility, is the topic for today's discussion. And this liquidity adjustment facility was introduced to provide enough liquidity in the economy, and also to provide interest rate signal to the market. In this section, the functioning of the liquidity adjustment facility in India is explained. In the first section, what is liquidity function and how it emerged in India, how that was evolved in Indian's monetary policy, etc., are explained. The liquidity adjustment facility is the primary instrument of Reserve Bank of India. That is, we know several instruments, monetary policy instruments are used by the Reserve Bank of India for controlling money supply, for controlling the economy. And one such instrument is the liquidity adjustment facility. And the basic purpose of this liquidity adjustment facility is modulating liquidity and transmitting interest rate signal to the market. It was introduced on the basis of the recommendation of Second Narasimhan Committee Report 1998. The liquidity adjustment facility mechanism was introduced on the basis of the recommendation of the Narasimhan Committee of 1998, that is in accordance with the second report of the Narasimhan Committee. And according to Narasimhan Committee recommendation, RBI's report to the market should be through the liquidity adjustment facility operated by way of repo and reverse repo, providing a reasonable corridor to the market players. And according to the Narasimhan Committee report, the RBI support to the market should be through the liquidity adjustment facility, and this should be operated by way of repo and reverse repo, and there should be a reasonable corridor also. It is to boost it is to provide information to it is to support the market. And accordingly, the liquidity adjustment facility was introduced for the first time from June 2000 onwards, and subsequent revisions were made on 2001 and 2004. And this liquidity adjustment facility refers to the difference between two key rates, as we have already mentioned, repo rate and reverse repo rate. Liquidity adjustment facility is also known as liquidity corridor, and we have, as mentioned earlier, there should be a reasonable corridor to the marketplace, and therefore liquidity adjustment facility is also known as liquidity. It was given, or it is used to aid bank in adjusting their day-to-day mismatches in liquidity. That is, removal of the mismatches in their day-to-day liquidity is the major objective of liquidity adjustment facility. It helps bank to quickly borrow money in the case of any emergency, or for adjusting their statutory liquidity ratio or cash reserve ratio requirements. In accordance with this, the liquidity adjustment facility helps the banks to quickly borrow money in case of any emergency. It consists of repo and reverse repo operations. Repo and reverse repo operation is the collateralized lending, that is, banks borrow money from the RBI to meet short-term needs by selling securities to RBI with an agreement to repurchase the same at a predetermined rate and date. That is the difference between the open market operation and repo and reverse repo transactions. One is the open market operation. In both cases, we know that the mechanism is buying and selling of securities. Here, there will be a condition of or agreement to purchase the same at a predetermined rate and date. The rate charged by the RBI for this transaction is called the repo rate. Repo operations therefore inject liquidity into the system. Reverse repo operation is done when the RBI borrow money from the commercial banks by lending securities. The interest rate paid by RBI in this case is called the reverse repo rate. And reverse repo operation, as we know, absorbs liquidity in the system, or absorbs liquidity from the system. The collateral used for repo and reverse repo operations are Government of India securities. That is, we know that these are the buying and selling of securities in the open market. In the case of repo and reverse repo rate, there will be an agreement to repurchase or purchase back on a specified rate and time. Oil bonds have been also suggested to include as collateral for liquidity adjustment. In addition to the Government of India securities, oil bonds were also suggested as a means. And liquidity adjustment facility. In liquidity adjustment facility, money transaction is done by the RTGS, that is a real-time gross settlement online money transfer method. That is, money transaction is done through the RTGS method. The origin of repo rates, that is one of the liquidity adjustment can be traced to as early as 1970 in US financial market, when wartime taxes made other sources of lending unattractive. The introduction of liquidity adjustment facility in India was on the basis of the recommendation of the in April 19, an interim liquidity adjustment, and we have already seen that it was introduced as per the or in accordance with the recommendation of the Msm Committee report of 1998, and in accordance with this in April 19 an interim LAF was introduced, and after that in 2000 the liquidity adjustment facilities was introduced, and 2001 and 2004 some changes were also made. Repo and reverse repo rates were announced separately till the monetary policy statement 35/2011. In this monetary policy statement, it has been decided that reverse repo rate would not be announced separately but will be linked to the repo rate. That is, now the linked reverse repo rates are announced as a link to the RBI or in accordance with the RBI rate. The reverse repo rate will be 100 basis points below the RBI repo rate. That is, the reverse repo rate will be 100 basis point below repo rate. The liquidity adjustment facility corridor, that is the excess of repo rate over reverse repo rate, has varied between 100 to 300 basis point. That is the corridor, and we know that there will be a corridor, and this corridor will be this corridor is decided in accordance with the difference between the repo and reverse repo rate, and in according to that, liquidity adjustment facility corridor may vary between 100 and 300 basis point. The period between April 2001 and March 2004 and June 2008 to early November 2008, so a broader corridor ranging from the period between April 2001 to March 2004 and June 2008 to early November 2008, a broader corridor was seen. That is, it ranges from 150 to 250 in the first period, and 200 to 300 basis point in the second mentioned period. During March 2004 to June 2008, the corridor was narrow with the rates ranging from 100 to 175 100 to 175 basis point. A narrow liquidity adjustment facility corridor is reflected from November 2008 onwards. That is, after 2008 November, a narrow liquidity adjustment corridor is seen. At present, the width of the corridor is 25 basis point. This corridor is used to contain any volatility in short-term interest rate. The liquidity adjustment facility is extended by the Reserve Bank of India to scheduled banks, excluding regional rural bank and primary dealers, to avail of liquidity in the case of requirements or park excess fund with RBI in the case of excess liquidity on the overnight basis against the collateral government securities, including government securities. That is, these facilities can be availed by the scheduled commercial bank except regional rural bank and primary dealers. We have seen the structure, and in that the liquidity adjustment facility was provided to scheduled and primary dealers, and RRBs were not allowed. The liquidity adjustment facility. Liquidity adjustment facility enables liquidity management on a day-to-day basis, and it is a monetary tool and which allows banks to borrow money through repurchase agreement or repos. And this for managing the day-to-day mismatches in the liquidity. If the liquidity is mismatch in the liquidity is durable in nature, the instruments like cash reserve ratio, market stabilization scheme, etc. are used. These are for meeting the day-to-day mismatches in the liquidity adjustment facility. The operation of liquidity adjustment facilities are conducted by way of repurchase agreement, that is repo and reverse with RBI being the counterparty of all transactions. The collateral used for this repo and reverse repo rates are primarily Government of India securities. Through liquidity adjustment facilities, banks are permitted to borrow only a certain percentage of net demand and time ability. It means the amount is fixed in accordance with the proportion is decided on the basis of the net demand and time liability. In case the bank requires more fund beyond what is permissible under liquidity, it can access another window called marginal standing facility. If a bank requires more funds than this, then they have to opt for another scheme, namely marginal standing facility. The functioning of liquidity adjustment mechanism or liquidity adjustment facility is given in this section. We have seen the features or the working of the liquidity adjustment facility. Now the functioning of liquidity adjustment facilities are given in this section. The liquidity adjustment facility works through various instruments devised by the RBI to inject liquidity into the banking system when the banking system or the institution need cash, as well as to absorb liquidity when the banking system has excess money. That is, this facility is provided by RBI either to inject liquidity or to absorb the liquidity. Beside the usual, we know that two important instruments used are repo and reverse repo. The liquidity adjustment facility also include auction-based repo and reverse repo, that is variable rate tools for marginal liquidity. That is, the liquidity adjustment facility also includes auction-based repo and reverse repo rates also. And the components of the liquidity adjustment facilities are repo, overnight fixed repo or the popular repo, reverse repo, overnight fixed reverse repo or the popular reverse repo, term repo, that is auction, overnight variable repo rate of repo, that is auction rate, overnight variable rate reverse repo, that is also auction rate. In 2013, RBI announced term repo as part of the LAF. That is, the term repo is one of the a tool or the instrument or the component of the liquidity adjustment facility, and it was introduced in the year 2013. Therefore, the components of this liquidity adjustment facility or the major instruments of liquidity adjustment facilities are repo, reverse repo, term, overnight repo and overnight reverse repo. These all are auction rates repo. This is the liquidity. The two components of liquidity, important components of liquidity adjustment facility are repo and reverse repo rate. Under repo, the banks borrow money from the RBI to meet short-term needs by putting government securities as collateral. And we know that under reverse repo, RBI borrows money from bank by lending security. The repo transaction inject money into the economy, whereas the reverse repo absorbs liquidity from the system. RBI now announces only the repo rate. Reverse repo rates, as we have already discussed, is linked with the RBI. After the launch of liquidity adjustment facility in 2013, with the two instruments of RBI, a fixed repo and reverse repo, the RBI introduced several other measures to supplement the liquidity adjustment facility under liquidity adjustment facility. One such term measure is term repo. These instruments are variable rate repo action, variable rate reverse repo, and the term repo actions. Uniqueness of this tool is that they are not used frequently and is used only when the RBI believes that there is a need to deploy them. These facilities works on the basis of the action. We have seen the components, and in that the term repo operations. Term repo includes the variable rate repo by auction, variable rate reverse by auction, and the term repo by this term. This is not used frequently, and it is used when RBI feels that it is need to apply. The variable repo and reverse repo, including term repo, means that the RBI make auction based on interest rate to inject or absorb liquidity through an LAF. What is varying is here the interest rate as the participating bank makes their auction on interest rate. The working of the auction route can be understood through the operation of term repo. Here, in this mechanism, the RBI undertakes auction and it is on the basis of the interest rate, and the interest rates are varied in accordance with the actions of the commerce participating bank, tuned with the or side by side with the liquidity adjustment facility. How this affect the economy, or what is the working mechanism if the economy is explained in this section. The central bank is responsible in facilitating the smooth functioning of the financial system, and an important an important fact phenomena associated with the operation of the financial system, an important problem or an important distorting phenomena associated with the operation of the financial system is the liquidity or the changes in liquidity. The liquidity is what is the liquidity? Liquidity means adequate and timely cash in the system for the financial institution to carry out the function. This is the meaning of liquidity. And the liquidity in the economy may fluctuate due to many factors, and excess liquidity may transfer itself into price rises. Simultaneously, liquidity shortage may lead to shortages in the amount of money in the financial system. The responsibility of RBI is to therefore it is the responsibility of the RBI to keep liquidity in a daily manner. Liquidity adjustment facility is a liquidity adjustment mechanism for the banking system. It is aimed to inject liquidity into the system when there occurs liquidity shortages simultaneously, and it also absorbs if there is excess liquidity. The liquidity adjustment facility is working in an automatic manner based on repo and reverse repo transaction. The liquidity adjustment facility is operating on a daily basis, and the central point of liquidity adjustment facility is that liquidity injection is done through through the repo operations, and the liquidity is done through the reverse repo. Liquidity absorption is done through the reverse repo operation. Here, the liquidity adjustment facility is vested with the RBI, and the liquidity means the amount of availability of cash to the financial institution for running their businesses. Sometimes there will be excess liquidity, sometimes there will be shortage of liquidity. It is the duty of central bank to keep the liquidity in a stable manner, and for that the RBI uses this mechanism. And the two important tools or the instruments used for this are the repo and reverse repo transactions. The working of repo and reverse repo transaction or operation under liquidity facility is as follows. Banks which have liquidity shortage approaches the RBI and gives government securities to it while obtaining loans. During the time of liquidity stringency, most of the commercial banks will be resorting to repo operations. On the other hand, during the time of excess liquidity, the commercial banks will be parking money with the RBI and thus will be earning an interest rate. The reverse repo rate is fixed lower than the repo rate. This means that whenever the repo rate changes, the reverse repo rate also changes equally. During inflationary period, the reverse repo rate transactions will be there, and if there is depressionary or if there is the shortage of liquidity, the repo transactions will be done. The RBI uses this facility for adjusting liquidity to manage high levels of inflation, and it does this by raising repo rate, which increases the cost of debt servicing, and this in turn reduces the play of investment money within the economy. If RBI wants to boost the economy after a period of low economic growth, then repo rate can be lowered to encourage business to borrow, thus increasing supply of money. An important outcome of liquidity adjustment facility operation by the RBI is that banks in India generally uses LAF repo window more compared to other options like home money market to obtain temporary funds or liquidity whenever they need it. Hence, the interest on that repo, which is called the repo rate, has become very influential for the banks. It became very binding for the banks in India to change their interest rate whenever the RBI changes its repo rate. That is the important tool of one of the important tool of liquidity adjustment facility is that repo transactions, and Banks in India generally use liquidity adjustment facility repo windows for more compared to other options like all money market or other temporary funds. Then, hence the interest on that repo, which is called repo rate, has become very influential for the banks. That is, most of the banks prefer these repo transactions or the liquidity adjustment facilities, and in accordance with that, the changes in the repo rate, it plays an important role in the, well, it has started playing an important role in the economy or in the monetary field. And thus, the liquidity adjustment facility helped the RBI to develop short-term interest rate as an effective instrument of monetary transaction. Here, the mechanism is very simple that most of the bank prefers repo transaction as part of the liquidity adjustment facility, and therefore the repo rate plays an important role in the economy, and RBI is using this to develop short-term interest rate, or this RBI uses this to develop a short-term interest rate as an effective instrument of monetary transaction transmission. And now the majority of the commercial banks opt the repo transaction as which is a part of liquidity adjustment facility, and therefore this rate has an important role in the economy, and RBI uses this situation for determining of to develop short-term interest rate as an effective instrument of monetary transmission. On the basis of the assessment of the current and evolving macroeconomic situation, the Monetary Policy Committee at its meeting on May 22nd, 2020 decided to reduce the policy rate under the liquidity adjustment facility by 40 basis point to 4% from 4.4% with immediate effect. Accordingly, marginal standing facility rate and the bank rate stands reduced to 4.25% and 4.65%, and the reverse repo under the liquidity adjustment facility stands reduced to 3.35% from 3.75%. That is during the this period, that is in May 2020, the RBI decided to reduce the rates of both the repo, reverse repo, and other transactions. And in order to meet the situations of the impact of COVID-19 on the economy, and the MPC decided to continue with the accommodative stances. A brief description of what is marginal standing facility is given. This was already explained in the instruments of monetary policy. Here a brief description about the margin standing facility is given. The margin standing facility is a new liquidity adjustment mechanism window introduced or created by Reserve Bank of India in its credit policy 2011. It is the rate at which the bank are able to borrow overnight funds from RBI against the government securities. The banks are already able to borrow from RBI via the repo rate. Then why MSF is needed? The question is, banks are already able to borrow from RBI via repo rate. Then why MSF is needed? This window was created for commercial bank to borrow from RBI in certain emergency condition when interbank liquidity dries up completely and there is a volatility in the overnight interest rate. That is, remember this facility is provided when the bank fails to meet the emergency condition due to the lack of liquidity fund, and when there is volatility in the overnight interest rate. Here we know that they have a provision of liquidity adjustment facility in the form of repo and reverse. If that fund, it is in accordance with the net time and deposit liability, if that facility is over, then the bank can opt this one, or when the volatility in overnight rate is very high. To curb this volatility, RBI allowed them to pledge the government securities and get more funds from the RBI at a rate higher than the repo. Thus, the overall idea behind the MSF is to contain volatility in the overnight interbank rate. If there is a high volatility in the interbank rate, the marginal standing facility can be availed. The rate of interest of MSF will be higher than the repo rate. The bank can borrow up to 1% of their net time and net deposit and time liabilities from this facility. This means that difference between repo and MSF is 200 basis point. So repo rate will be in the middle, reverse repo will be 100 basis point below, and the MSF rate 100 point above the repo rate. Thus, if repo rate is x%, reverse repo rate is x minus 1%, MSF rate is x plus 1%. Here the major difference between these two components are given: marginal standing facility rate and liquidity adjustment facility. As we have already discussed, liquidity marginal standing facilities are used by the banks when the facility for liquidity adjustment facility in the form of repo transactions dries up, and thereafter then also the banks need more then also if banks needs more money, then this marginal standing facility rate can be used. That bank will get 1% of their net deposit and time liability as loan from the Reserve Bank of India. The rate of interest will be higher than the repo rate. The MSF rate will be 100 point above the repo rate. Under MSF, the bank can borrow funds up to 1% of their. This we already discussed. The minimum amount for which RBI receives application is rupees 1 crore, and afterwards its multiple of 1 crore. And the major difference between repo and marginal standing facility rates are given here. MSF, the major difference is that between MSF and repo rate is that MSF is used only in emergencies, and repo rates are used in day-to-day affairs if there is liquidity mismanagement. The RBI does this to control interest rate volatility by allowing commercial bank to borrow against government securities at a higher rate than the prevailing rate. And another difference is that repo rate is bank can pledge government securities from SLR quota up to 1% under marginal standing facilities. Even if the SLR comes below 21.5%, bank need to pay a penalty under the marginal standing facility. There is another difference is that bank can pledge government securities from the SLR quota up to 1% under the MSF. Therefore, the major difference is that MSF is used only in the case of emergencies. Second one, under this the bank can pledge the government securities from SLR quota also up to 1%. Now we can conclude the liquidity adjustment facility, and it was introduced in the year 2000, and it is to absorb liquidity it is to manage liquidity in the economy, and the two major important instruments are repo and reverse repo rate. And by changing the rates of this, the Reserve Bank of India absorbs or infuse liquidity into the economy. It is for managing the day-to-day changes in the liquidity of the economy. These are the points we already discussed. That is, it was introduced by RBI in 2000. It was effective from May 9, 2011. All commercial bank except RBI and primary dealers having current account and SDL accounts with RBI is eligible for this. All for liquidity adjustment facility, the bank can take a loan of rupees 5 crores and a multiple of 5 crores. Eligible securities are repo, reverse repo, government securities, treasury bills, etc. And the major difference between the MSF and the LAF is that all scheduled banks having current account and subsidiary general ledger account with the RBI will be eligible to participate in MSF, but in the case of LAF, RRBs are exempted. In the case of marginal standing facility, the request will be received for a minimum amount of rupees 1 crore and multiple of rupees 1 crore thereafter. Eligible securities will be undertaken in all SLR eligible transferable government of India dated security bills and state development loans. These are the major difference between the LAF and MSF. The rate of Interest charged for the MSF will be higher than the repo rate. Repo and reverse repo rate, which are the important tools of the liquidity adjustment mechanism. This is the liquidity adjustment facility, or this is the mechanism to adjust liquidity in the economy through liquidity adjustment facility.